And I don't know if I'm nervous or excited about this talk.
Oh, I don't know either.
So Tony Hall obtained his Master of Science in Animal Nutrition from Aberdeen University in Scotland. After 18 years working with UK dairy farm systems, he moved to the USA and based in Canastota.
Canastota, it's Native American, means 3 pines.
There we go. He's got 40 years of international experience in providing practical technical support in nutrition and feed management to modern dairy cow businesses over 20 countries across all continents. His specific emphasis has been on feed composition, forage quality, rumen health, enabling TMRs, dry and transition cows, milk component yield and farm profitability. He's one of the Dairy Technical Services team from Lallemand Animal Nutrition North America, and today he's speaking on unlocking the benefits of fibre.
Is that right? I'm at the right place. Yeah.
Great. Excellent. We'll get started, and and looking forward to this, Tony.
All right. Can anybody hear me? And Phil, can you hear me over there? Brilliant. Okay. The echo is, I won't have any trouble projecting. I might have some trouble deafening myself. But listen, thank you to our colleagues at Nutritech for having me here. Any resemblance today between what you thought you're going to get and what I present will be purely coincidental. I'm kind of hoping there's going to be something for everybody. And I tend to like a bit of history, so I just wanted to make that note there when the cows first came. A little group of cows there from New South Wales dropped in to get things going, and then by about the 1840s you were exporting dairy products from these Shorthorns or Durhams as they were, you know, kind of multi-purpose breeds, but they could give milk, and the rest, they say, is history. So I always like to do a bit of background and find out what's been going on when the cows came here and how things developed. So look, I'm delighted to be here. I tend to speak with a fairly fast Celtic Northern English accent. That's going to enable us to keep to time, but in all seriousness, if there are things that I say that don't make sense, then please put your hand up and ask for points of clarification. No difficult questions, thank you very much. Right then, I've got to keep to time. I don't want any daggers from the Dane as time goes on. I probably won't pay attention and will fall off the stage. That will be to your benefit. Even if I didn't do the rest of the presentation, then this would be it, okay? It's not that profound, but it's actually true. And so in order for me to be helpful to you and not bore you, if I could just get a show of hands, and I know it won't be everybody, but around the room, who in some format might be working not just with grazing, but with like a partial TMR or mixing ensil forages or doing just something that might be, you know, supplementing pasture when it's in short supply. How many people might be doing some type of mix? There we go. Whew, sigh of relief. Boy, you're in safe territory. Here we go. So I am not here to make any judgment about feeding systems, and I'm not actually here to have a debate about what's better, you know, confinement TMR where I come from, okay, or all pasture-fed cows, okay? That's not the purpose. It's just if you make any transitions into ensil materials and mixed feeding, I would love for you to avoid the mistakes that we make, okay? I come from an area, you know, now in New York State where I live for 25 years, despite my Pommy accent. I come from an area where it's nearly all storage feeding. I do have some partial TMR experience, but obviously way back when with the British Government Extension Service, I was dangerous working in grazing dairy systems and trying not to kill cows on 2x milking, right? So this is kind of where we start, and you all know this, you know, there's sage people out there with a bit less hair like me and some greying around the edges, and we've all seen this before. There's some bright young things now, unfortunately, orientated with NIR black boxes, and everything that comes out is right from the black box, of course. But, you know, some of us of a certain age are familiar with the wet chemistry there, and we had a challenge, I think, in the industry because, you know, that fibre is a nutritional entity and wasn't really easy to measure chemically. We had that old crude fibre from the proximate analysis wean system, but it wasn't very useful. But Peter Van Soos put us in the right direction, and then Michael quite rightly explained how this helps us. And I hope you kind of got that. You know, whether you're using a kind of CNCPS-based ration formulation system or not, I hope you got what the message there was, that lignin is not useful. UNDF 240 is very useful because it gives you a measure of the ballast or material that's indigestible. Strictly speaking, UNDF 240, I think, Michael, it'd be fair to say, would masquerade as INDF, but because INDF is time point infinity and will not be alive to take the measurement, UNDF 240, 10 days fermentation for ballast measurement seems to be where it's gone. So obviously, The reverse of that is if it's ballast, then everything else that's available is potentially, they're the words, potentially digestible NDF. And Michael showed you the fractions of stuff that might be digesting fast, digesting moderately, digesting slowly, and then putting some rates alongside that. So I kind of hope you got that message, because that is actually going to be a unifying principle for anybody who's feeding 100% pasture, okay, and anybody who's 100% confinement. We're now able to describe fibre in such a way that with UNDF 240 and some of those other values, we can actually get that to predict appetite limits, okay, and you know, how they're going to use the fibrous material. So, we touched on this. This is just a brief slide. We're coming down the road of amylase NDF, because there are certain materials out there, like a maize silage. Anybody here involved with maize silage in any degree or any context? Yeah, thank you. It's going to interfere with things, so we kind of take that out. And again, not in your part of the world, but in my part of the world, we seem not to be able to make, I call them haylage, like grass silages, legume silages. We seem to be fairly greedy, either that or we've got a lot of moles and groundhogs, but we seem not to be able to avoid bringing soil contamination in with our products, and so we need to make sure we account for that. So generally speaking, you're going to find a move to the industry of NDF on an organic matter basis. And those of you, as you start to build your careers up in the ensiled forage world, where it's going to complement the pasture, you're going to realize that we've become ash blind over a period of time, and you can actually use the ANDF on an organic matter basis and look across to the ANDF on a dry matter basis. And if those differences are more than 1.5 units, you've got some sort of soil or dust contamination, no matter what the ash value is. So let's take an example. If your ANDF on a dry matter basis is 45% on a dry matter, for want of a better word, and you know, your ANDF on an organic matter basis is 43, we've got a 2-unit spread, we've got some dry matter there. Okay, so there's a lot of utility with these numbers that you can kind of build on in the future. As you probably realized, it's an alphabet soup. I'm not going to go all the way through this, but this is just where you're going to be heading for the future, particularly the bright young things. You're going to be able to describe the pasture in the same way as Michael talked to you about, and then you're going to be able to think about some of these things down the road. And where I'm going to leave you, but we're not going to get into, if we get into forages that are not really suitable for dairy cows and put a ballast or brake on intake and performance, you know, and a classic example would be trying to bring some straw in, and when it doesn't work, obviously you've put a lot of UNDF 240 in, and if you chop that stuff really fine, you can get that passed through the system. That's what we call for the future, and we can kind of talk about this within the next 2 to 4 years, Nadine, if I don't block my copybook, you know, that's going to be the physically effective UNDF, that's right, and that's the ultimate description of what a ballast would be in managed situations for dairy cows. There we go. I'm going to drink some of my rumen fluid. These will masquerade as rumens. Or they'll save my life, one or the other. So, we've gone past the alphabet soup. Now, a lot of you won't know, this is my best slide. That's a little unnerving for you because the rest is going to be rubbish, right? The only reason why this is the best slide is because I'm IT challenged, and I've actually got a GIF on here showing a cow chewing. Okay, most of the stuff I load up, thank you, madam. Most of the stuff I load up, checks in the mail, most of the stuff I load up on PowerPoint doesn't work at all. So even if you don't like the rest of the narrative, at least we got this going for us. Now, it was something, I think, the definitions that Dr. Ian Lean put up, and it doesn't matter who's right or wrong, and I think you'd be leaning more towards this, not just because it says Australia, but effective fibre, been reading a lot of material. And that's fine, I don't have a problem with that. And Dave Mertens, across the other side of the Pacific, was going the same way. As you start to get more in managed ensiled forages or chopping dry forage and building partial TMRs, or heaven forbid you're even doing a TMR, you need to think about more of this, yeah, because the length is important. If it's too long, they're going to sort it out. If it's too fine, the rate of passage is going to be phenomenally high, and it may not do what you want it to do. And some of those things we want this fibre to do is kind of like, obviously, stimulate rumination, okay, or cud chewing. We heard about that. Yeah, we know salivary bicarbonate's important, but I think we've all realised now, Greg, let's just have a question if you're still here, mate. If we're going to just tweak salivary bicarbonate, what thing might just have the edge on it if we get it right? Where is the bicarb coming from in the majority? The rumen wall, Tony. Remember that presentation this morning when we were all waking up? There's a lot of bicarb coming across the rumen wall, doing that exchange to absorb those VFAs. All the young ones here who just graduated college and just How many of you remember the Henderson-Hasselbalch equation from your biochemistry notes, right? I'm not going to ask any more, just want to know who remembers it. That's really important because you don't always get a lot of passive diffusion across rumen walls. So Greg, I hope, opened your eyes on that one. We can get a lot of bicarb in the rumen, yes, from salivary bicarbonate, that's absolutely right, but also on the ionic exchange. Where I'm going with this, I just want you to get your mind thinking about physically effective fibre where you might be using forages other than pasture to help make those work. We need it not to be selected and sorted out, but we need it to be ingested, but we don't need it to be too fine a particle size that it'll pass through too quickly. And we're going to delve into some numbers. And this is where we get to the stage where it's not what Tony says, because why would that be important? You don't know me. It might be important in New York State where I live and work, but it won't be important here. So we're going to kind of have a look at, reviewed published literature, kind of take us down that world. Now, I know we're not going to have access to a ROTAP because I don't use one myself, but how many people may have invested in a Penn State shaker box for whatever reason and dared not tell anybody? Yeah, absolutely. Now, I would say this is a great tool. As we grow together using more of these type of feeds for partial TMRs or TMRs, this is a good tool to have, okay, because you've got certain trays here. First of all, you've got the bottom pan, there's no holes in that. That collects all the fines, either forage fines or grain fines. The updated version has got 4mm holes in it. That's the one I recommend. If anybody's got that 1.18mm tray, just discard it or offer it to a friend who you don't think much about. It's worthless, okay? So or use it to sieve soil or whatever you want to do, give it for a sandbox for the kids. So invest in the new 4mm, this one's 8mm, and this one's 19mm. So it is possible in these things where you are thinking about the physically effective fibre that will always be important in partial TMRs and TMRs. Not a thing you have to worry about in long bit material, with high pasture allowance and intakes, but certainly any time you're doing any other type of feed in there, that'll be important. What you would need to know is what the NDF is, and your nutritionist or consultant or advisor or your good self will tell you that. If you add the 4mm, the 8mm, and the 90mm tray together and multiply that by your NDF, that will be good enough to eyeball a physically effective NDF value on chopped forages and grains that are going in as a partial TMR or TMR. Trust me, I use it all the time. It is, okay? So that's something you can develop, and what you do is you go out to the herds that are successful doing this and you take the samples and you shake them out, okay? We'll develop this thing together and put some hard numbers on it. So, as always, a pop quiz is always interesting. So, this one should be easy. I think you're going to ace this. If we were looking at trays and what tray should not be included, okay, in the calculation for physically effective fibre, let's have a show of hands for the top tray A. Oh, you're so smart, you people. What about mid-tray 8mm? On the ball here in Cambridge. What about the mid-tray 4mm and bottom tray combined? Now, if you talk to Zabelli in Europe, he's kind of interested in just having the top tray and the 8mm, okay? So you just got to be careful where the numbers are coming from. But I think he's going to lean towards that. What about the bottom tray or pan? Should that be included in the physically effective fibre? No, Tony, it should not. You're right, because it's all forage fines will have a high rate of passage. Doesn't mean it doesn't have a high nutritional value. It might be grain fines, and it will certainly have a great surface area. So if it hangs about long enough, it can be hydrated and then get some value from it. But it doesn't contribute anything physically, which was to the point you made before about the aspect of chewing or rumination. So we've kind of got that one out of the way, and that's good. Now, I can actually stop at this. You would be grateful. Okay, early finish, get the panel up, back home, see the kids. So I could stop here, but I always like to bring you the most recent research. Okay, so here we are, Kellner, 1908. And it's just that, some of these research scientists do this kind of intuitively, okay? And I just wanted to show you this. I'm not going to read it all out to you, not the full paragraph. I highlighted a bit, but it just gets you thinking about what they really knew just from cow observation, which was something Gary said earlier on. Okay, cattle as a rule get chopped straw. I know there's something about straw here, but we could apply this deliberately to any of the chopped forages of about 1 to 1.5 inches. Okay, if they don't, there's no advantage in chopping any shorter. Okay. And if we do, there's a danger of colic, aka colic in those days would be indigestion, okay? It could be that acidosis we're talking about. Remember the time we're talking about here, just past the death of Queen Victoria. So it'd be a bit like if you're reading a Charles Dickens novel and somebody dropped down dead from dropsy. You know, dropsy is a cute Victorian word for heart attack, right? They didn't really know that at the time. So anytime you're reading Charles Dickens, then you're going to be seeing dropsy. You're going to know that's a heart attack, right? So now there's more common sense hidden in that paragraph than you think, because an inch to an inch and a half, it's pretty tricky for the girls to sort out, but it's still going to hang about long enough to promote, as he called it, mastication at the time, okay? That was probably more an eating effect, but it would stimulate rumination as well. So even in 1908, they were kind of drilling things down a little bit. Okay, we won't spend long on this, but I know this is something that Gary was thinking about in some of his Q&A there. This is Clive Belch from Britain, just giving us a little bit of insight into saliva production there, both in terms of eating and rumination. And the message to take home here, as you'll see, and again, there's no implied criticism of any feed stuff here. I'm just trying to make an academic point, or as academic as my world gets. I'm usually hands-on and applied. But yeah, here's where we are with the ground grains. They're not really contributing anything to that kind of rumination situation. And any time you process forage too much, okay, we've got a straw there, and we've got a hay there, it's going to mimic what a ground grain will do. But equally, if it goes too long, well, then it might be not ingested, or even if it is ingested, there's an amount of eating which maybe could compromise rumination. And one thing we're going to have to bear in mind in the biology of the dairy cow is cows almost have an inelastic requirement for lying down and ruminating. That's like nirvana for a dairy cow, okay? We call that recumbent, get it right, get the teeth in, there you go. Recumbent rumination, that's what we call that, okay? And they like that. That's where they're the most comfortable, will make the most milk because the blood flow goes easy through the gland, okay? And it's kind of therapeutic. And we're going to sit and think about that a little while around the world and here in New Zealand. But any time we get out of our audience into people who don't really understand what we're trying to do, somebody's going to grab hold of this and set standards on a cow well-being basis that recumbent rumination is a number they'll want to measure, right? So don't take anything for granted. The cow definitely needs it. And the only point I'm trying to make here, and again, no implied criticism, in any feeding system, there will be a compromised trade-off between the amount of time that the cow can eat and the amount of time she feels that she can allocate to lie down and ruminate and use that stuff effectively. And she has to do that to get it out the rumen. It has to be chewed, okay, which will grind those particles. It has to get that saliva mixed with it, okay, that changes the specific gravity, then that can start to float down and start to find the orifice that Michael was talking about before. And in a moment, as we see, it's going to have to be a certain particle size, okay. So there's a lot going on the physical dynamics of rumen function to make these diets work. And that's really what I'm trying to get you to think about. Is it about ME intake? Yeah, it is about ME intake. But how's the ME presented? And what's the cow going to do with that when she's got that? It doesn't look like it, but cows have really busy days. The reason why it's really busy is they do like to lie down and chew the cud a lot. That's what they were built and designed to do, okay? Graze fast, get out of the way of predators, and then lay down at night and process it. Now, as simplistic as that sounds in terms of managing cows, sometimes they've got to go get up and get walked. And the longer they have to walk for milking, the more time is out of the budget. And so there's going to see that in a moment. A bit of a trade-off between the systems. We don't get away scot-free, okay, in an all-managed confined dairy system. I can think of research in universities, Gary. Yeah, I figured you might be.
Yeah. Have you considered pseudo-rumination when an animal regurgitates?
Yes.
Chews for about 15 seconds and swallows?
Yes.
That's good. I just thought
Yeah, no, it's a good point, mate. Yeah, no, and you know, this is just one paper out of many from this group down there in the south of England. So I just picked one to make my point, right? And I'm going to pick a Rick Grant one in a minute, just to kind of develop it towards acid propionate ratios and then milk production values. I just want to kind of establish the biology, right? And where I was going was just a trade-off in time. You know, there's a bit of an inverse relationship between eating and but you're right. Yeah.
just something
No.
I want to hear about.
No, you're right. It's all good. So that leads me into this. I know you're not ardent, alfalfa makers, but I want to say something which I hope is practical and useful, okay? There will be an effect of physical size on where some of these VFA ratios might be, how they might be buffered by salivary bicarbonate, and where your milk production might be. And each farmer, farm manager, consultant and advisor has to take a position in conversation between themselves where they think the risk factors lie. Bear with me as I outline this table, which I think is pretty self-evident, and you'll see where I'm going. I know the risks that the New York State dairy farmer will go down, but let's just lay the scene for you if you'll bear with me a second. Okay, here we go. So we had a course diet here where the theoretical length of cut was 0.38 inches. Now, let's just be clear. I've got to take a diversion here, Captain, so give me a few minutes, right? TLC is exactly what it says it is. It's not mean particle length, it's theoretical length of cut. So let's get something clear when we work out in the field. If we're making maize silage, how do we harvest maize silage? Can we get it to a sort of dry time where we can just test what the dry matter is, and then we'll go in and harvest it standing up? So that's like a row crop harvest, right? Yeah? Anybody do that? Nobody cuts corn silage and spreads it out to dry because we just don't do that, right? So if you just think about the mechanics, I'm trying to lift your mind here from the forage, I'm not full enough, from the forage, just think about, you've got to think about what you're presenting to the cow, and that means you've got to think about how it's harvested. I'm going to give you a little rhyme here, which will sound stupid, but it actually works. When you go into something like corn silage, because it's a row crop, the TLC you get is the TLC you set. So if you decide from reading the literature on harvesting corn silage, where you're taking it as a direct cut, so it's dried down for you in the field and made the starch, if you set your TLC at 19, 20, 21 millimeters, the kernel processing full on, and you look at those lengths, that's what you're going to get. You can test it and you can do it, and you should do it, okay? If you've got windrow crops, where you're, I guess this is what you do. What we do with grass and alfalfa is you chop it, spread it out because you want it to dry, called wilting right, hope for the best, remerge it back with rate soil mergers, risk of soil contamination. But when you think about that feed going into the chopper, that's higgledy-piggledy. Higgledy-piggledy means something in New Zealand, it's all over the place. It's not uniform. So a TLC on a row crop is totally different. The mean particle lengths will vary in size. I won't claim that 2 minutes back, Captain, please, but I just had to go down that row. So if you see the TLC, that's not the exact length, it's just a measurement of coarseness, and there would be longer pieces in there as well as short pieces. Because if you look at this one, 0.19, that's the fine, okay, but there'll be other pieces, but they won't be as long as this one. You see the point I'm trying to make? Okay, so the particle lengths in here are bigger than the particle lengths in here, and then Rick made a 50-50 mixture here, okay, and the whole idea about these diets to these match groups of cows, and I can't remember the number in each pen, and that's bad of me, but I just can't, so I'll just fess up and say so. But you can see what I was trying to do. All the diets are isonitrogenous, okay, isoenergetic, iso-NDF, all the factors you'd like to control. And what Rick Grant is really doing here, he's trying to look at how the cows will respond in terms of VFA production and milk production, and in this case, milk fat, just in relation to, remember, we can do these on paper, we can do these in ration formulation program, we can do them CCMPS. What does the cow actually see when it gets physically in front of her, right? And if you have a look, we start to get some of these subtle moves here. I wouldn't think that's dramatic, and I know we can have a debate, but under these circumstances, I'm going to postulate to you that is quite a significant move. The reduction in particle size was significant. So if I was balancing off, okay, against highly digestible pasture, but, I probably didn't have enough of it. But if I would want to be in this area here for a matter of safety, and I might lean more this way. If you look at the AP ratios, acetic acid to prop, you can kind of see what's going on here. Dry matter intake, nothing really going on here. But if we just look at the milk fats a moment, yeah, that's a small reduction there, but we've definitely nailed that one, right? There's no change in conjugate linoleic acid or essential fatty acids or anything. This is purely a symptom of the particle size change, if you see where I'm trying to go with this. And, okay, you can see now if we do it in terms of 4% fat-corrected milk. So I just want to give you a feel that at least under managed systems, a TMR or a partial TMR, depending on what the particle sizes of the forages are, how you've chopped them and processed them, can have a large bearing on how that rumen function is going to go. Now, we don't always need to be safe. My guys are going to see that in New York, and they're going to see, you know what, yeah, I want the extra 2 pounds of milk. We're just going to push the boat out and chop the haylage a little bit finer. And that's exactly what they do. And we can get away with that, okay? And you know you can. You know your herds. I was a dairy consultant before I joined Lallemand, which was great because it gave me an insight. It's like being a poacher and a gamekeeper. You can see both sides of the story, right? So I would have herds where I could run at 38% NFC, okay, and 24% starch. You all know what I'm saying? They're the herds that don't manage things very well. The wheels can come off, you never know what's going to happen. There's no consistency, right? So you play those diets pretty safe, pretty cool. I've got other herds that will break the NRC rules. We can go above 42% NFC, okay? We can be at 44% NFC and 28% starch, okay? And they'll have high dry matter intakes because cows eat pounds, not percents. But those herds were super consistent, feathered in all the changes, you know, sharpened the knives, cut of bars were good, everything was crisp and clean. We knew physically and chemically what we were getting into, and they managed the cows really well. So my guys, they would go for that and realize that they could walk that tightrope without falling off, if that makes sense. So, you know your client, you know your cows, you know your feedstock, you pick your poison, and you'll operate hopefully somewhere in that area and won't let anybody get down here, which is where the Penn State Shaker box comes in, right? Right, I've got to be careful how I pronounce his surname. Schatz's piece of work is really, really good. If you haven't read it, I encourage you to read it, because it goes right where Michael was coming from. If you saw some of those photographs that Michael showed you about those fibers coming out that were left there, this is the exit route out the rumen, okay? And there's another pop quiz on here, and it's going to be real easy for you. But what you've got here, if we just frame it for you, you've got all the different sizes here in millimeters, okay? Yeah, we've got the chews per gram of NDF, which we've seen before from Clyde's work. We're not really going to focus on that. I just want you to take a wild guess, as if you were going to guess the particle length that looked like it was going to escape that area that Michael was talking about, the reticular rumen basal orifice. What do you think the particle size usually is that's escaping? Anybody?
Do you mean the majority of them?
Yeah.
The biggest ones?
No, just the general range, Gary.
Well, the majority of products escaping, if you put a bacterial particle, it's very small.
Yeah, so that's the point. Yeah, so what we found here when they were doing this work, and Rick Grant since repeated this at the minor, but I got this because it was JDS, so it was a bit more substantiated than personal communication. You've got stuff that's about 1 centimetre going through. Now that won't be a surprise, because most of us, if we're kicking boots over, you know, you'll see stuff like that. I just want to make the point, because this then ties into feeding behaviour. So for that escape to take place, there's got to be a certain amount of chewing on eating and then rumination, okay? And the eating will get in the way of the rumination. She needs that rumination time to break those particles down for them to exit the rumen, okay? So you see the point I'm trying to make it. That's a physical limitation. And so again, we've got a trade-off here between where we want to chop materials, okay, in managed PMRs and TMRs, but we don't want them too small because we don't want to lose that effect we got from Rick Grant's work on milk production, but we don't want them too long if it takes too long to chew them down, depending on how digestible they are, okay? You see what a nice tightrope, which is why we've got to follow our cows real closely, have a look at how they're ruminating and what they're doing and where the milk components are. A nice trade-off here between the physics of a feed, okay, and the chemistry. In the partial TMR and TMR world, we get sorting, okay? I sometimes get a question, why do cows sort? My usual answer is because they can. It's a bit like, why do people rob banks? Because that's where the money is, and I suppose that's partly it. You know, so but if you think about it as a calf, sweet milk replacer, sweet calf grain, they're carboholics. It's a bit like my grandkids in Kentucky. I've got a table here of carrots, uncooked, not peeled, a table here of chocolate. I know which one the grandkids are going to go to. So anytime you've got these type of feeding scenarios down a feed pad or in a feed bunker, in a feed trough, where you're offering something extra over and above the pasture or in place of the pasture that's not available, just have to be aware about cow feeding behavior. So we can set things up, and then the cow is going to do her damnedest to undermine it, okay? And her feeding behavior allows her to do that. She's got a tongue that can really work this, and those of you who are familiar with breeds, because this breed drives me crazy when I'm working in it in a good way, Jerseys are more good at this than black and whites. You go to a Jersey farm with a lot of metal around the place, and you hear the clanging of the metal while they exercise their tongues on gate latches and God knows what else they can find. Yeah, anyway, that's a story for another day. So, there was a trick question in the last, you got the main bit right about the bottom pan, but the 19 millimeter, just with that 19 millimeter hole in the top tray of the Penn State separator, it's not all 19 millimeters because of the effect of the horizontal shake. This is not like Dave Merton's rotor tap. You have longer particles in there, and anything that's long can be sorted out. And so there's just a case here that maybe the top tray is not so useful. I'm going to show you some US-centric work for TMRs, And then we'll extend them out a little bit, and don't fall off the edge, Tony, by thinking about how the PMRs might go as well. But I've got to start with a published work, even though it's storage-fed material. So anyway, drier materials are more prone to sorting, okay, than softer ones. And here's the standards that we now, if you think about the Penn State documents you will have seen, this is kind of where they started, but now we're moving more in this area here, really focusing on that 8 millimeters. And in that 8 millimeter, it won't all be 8 millimeter. It'll be stuff, you know, from about half an inch to an inch, inch and a half maybe, depends how it goes through the top tray. That's where we put the majority of it for. This is the full TMR. So you can see here the fines will be driven by not just the forage fines, but the grain fines as well. Now, I do some work with partial TMRs, okay, and you could not use this, and they've yet to develop and publish in the peer-reviewed domain where you want to be for PTMRs. But in my experience, and my experience is only about 5% of my work, there'll be a lot less here for obvious reasons, okay, because the grains are being fed somewhere else, okay, usually like a Lallemand or Lallemand AMS unit, somewhere like that. And we'll have a lot more forage in here, and so we'll get ranges of about 15 to 18%. This will be about 55. This won't change very much, and this will be proportionately less. But the whole takeaway about this is the way these systems are developed, these numbers here, if you came stateside, would fit a herd averaging about 100 pounds, 43 kilograms, about 4.1% fat and 3.3, 3.4 protein, because that's the minor herd and that's what they do. Now, everybody doesn't have to aspire to that. The reason why I'm saying that is you can build up your own database by using this technique on your PMRs and TMRs and seeing how it matches where you are in your feeding system, because this is always going to be part of a system. Just because you get the right numbers doesn't necessarily mean it'll work all the time. Here's where I wanted to go with this. Again, no implied criticism. I looked at numbers, and this isn't just Tony saying this, I just went across a whole range of publications out of New Zealand, Australia, Argentina, Penn State, New York. I wanted to just give us a feel for the busy day that a cow has. I could have broke it down more, but I wanted just to digest this a little bit. I'm going to start with confinement first, okay, because I'm more familiar with it, and I can whip through that real quickly. You can find higher rates, and there are some in JDS, but I wanted to give you a feel for it. So you've got eating rates of about 100, 120 grams of dry matter a minute, okay? So you've got a certain amount of time there, 240, 300 minutes, and they'll probably take that in 8, 10, 12 meals a day separately. Meals will be a bit bigger after morning milking. Depends if it's a heifer or a mature cow, and generally speaking now, we can separate our first lactation heifers now to let them express their full eating behavior and genetic potential. That means because of that, we allow our girls quite a lot of time for rumination. And if you look at that, it'll at least be a minimum, okay? If you look at line time versus rumination, that's about 67%, something there. That leaves them about 400 minutes for social time. Now that's important because we'll probably be 3x. So that means depending how far they've got to go, you've got to walk, you're in a holding area, you've got to get milked, you've got to come back. So you can dock off quite a bit of time for doing that right. That just leaves you a little bit of time for socializing, like playing with your neighbor, maybe showing a bit of estrus behavior, and drinking some water, okay? So we can just about squeeze that in, and sometimes there's enough overage. We can see from some of the work that we've done, we can have a lot more rumination and line time. We can get 11, 12, 13 hours line time if our buildings are clustered quite tight, and we don't have to be away a long while for milking. So, again, no implied criticism, just from papers in the literature. If you look here, by definition, your eating rate's going to be different. It has to be. This is like a comparison between, let's have a bowl of soup. Okay, we can open a can. Okay, that's the full TMR, confined feeding. I'm in the house, open the can, put it in the saucepan, the soup's ready. Or we're going to get to the supermarket, get a bags of vegetables and meat, frying pan, oil, chop the onions, peel the veggies, get the stock boiled, you're going to be forever. So if you look at this in terms of eating time, versus eating rate, at pasture fed, it's just different. Doesn't make it worse, it just makes it different. The cow has an awful lot of work to do to get high quality pasture in the time available. And that's assuming she isn't eye-jinxed by bad weather, the pasture allowances that might be given, or anything else that might be going on. Doesn't make it a bad thing, just makes it what it is. So when you look in the literature, it means the rumination time can be a lot lower. There'll be a trade-off, and I'm sure there can be examples where it's going to be higher, but again, it actually, if you do those numbers, it kind of works out at about 65, 67, 68% of the line time. But here's where the crunch comes. If they want to grab a bit more line time, you don't have a lot of time to get out and get the 2x milking done. Puts a little bit of pressure on. Not impossible, but compared to ME balancing on a computer, gives us a bit more insight into the type of work those cows have got to do. So when you now think about combining those, and you might be nearly all pasture, but you're going to do a bit of partial TMR, the cow's behavior is going to change a bit, and I wanted to just think a little bit about cow behavior and some of the things you want to be looking for, which are a bit of mistakes that you do not make, I'm sure, okay? So, a few words on that before I move on into something visual. Everything interrelates, right? It's part of a system. Let's just elevate the ration off the paper, whatever you think it is, into how it is in front of the cow, how fast can the cow eat it, okay? How fast can she chew it, ruminate, how fast can it exit, when can she move on to the next behavior? And we want those all to be as good as we can, so they're interactions. So we've learned the hard way in managed systems. You heard me say this before, we are going to segregate out our first lactation heifers, okay? And we'll do that as much as we can, but we'll certainly do it, Greg, where money and buildings are available. We'll do it in the transition phase, because we know that's a bit of a pain, and we certainly won't overstock in the transition phase, okay? We'll do it in the early lactation phase as well. Now, the difference between me and Greg is that Greg is in a part of the world where they take care of cows real well. I think that's fair to say, Greg. The Canadians do look after the cows. You won't have the same stocking densities in that part of North America as I see, okay? So in a well-managed milk system, if you really want to see how storage, feeding and partial TMRs work, then Canada is a good place to visit. It's a great place to visit where I live in New York State, but we have a thing called bankers and lenders, and they're nervous people and like to spread the fixed costs over as many cows as possible, which means no matter what barn design we put there, they like to put more cows in so they can sleep better at night, which is great for the bankers but bad for the cows, okay? It's just the way life is. So we are tight for feeding space, tight for drinking space, but at least we can separate them. What it means we have to do, we have to make sure that food is in front of the cow all the time because their feeding rates are so fast. The single biggest cardinal sin that I would see in New York State, but probably not Ontario, Canada, Greg, when I go, is cows are out of feed. I got another story, referee. Can I have a couple of minutes on the side, please? Oh, one. So I'm now 67, okay? And when I was a young guy, I kind of thought, geez, I can do this job, and as I head to retirement, I can sort of start work at 9:30 in the morning, rock home at 3:30, have a beer, put my feet up. No. Actually, in my stage of my career, when I get called out troubleshooting, some poor unfortunate nutritionist is getting the backside hauled over the coals because their ration isn't working. So, you get out of bed early, you check the drive, it's snowing, it's all good stuff. You get on the farm at 4 o'clock in the morning, guess what? Cows are out of feed. Somebody made a mistake, either on forage drying matters, pen size numbers, load cells not working on the mixer, you name it, could be anything. The nutritionist didn't do anything wrong, cows just ran out of feed. And you have to get up early in the morning to see that, or, as I say, have you got cameras? We'll have a talk then. That's 1 minute, right? So, anyway, the single biggest cardinal sin is cows running out of feed, because the eating rate is so fast they can clear this stuff up, right? So anyway, here we go. You think that doesn't happen? This obviously is not New Zealand, this is a part of Australia. Always keep your eyes open. I spend a lot of time training the bright young things that come into our company. I try and get the heads out of NRC, the heads out of the computer. Let's walk a barn and let's do some cow signals. I know Dr. Ian Lean is big on this. We're going to lose that. Let's find the full rumens. Let's find everything expanded of the short rib. Let's see some happy lines. Let's see some chewing. So, okay, what's wrong with this picture? Cows can't reach. Yeah. Greg saw this, and the first thing he said is that TMR needs pushing up, and he's right, okay? Now, I was a bit cheeky. We could be forgiven for saying they were busy, they were going to host some guests from overseas, so they forgot to do it while we were there. But there's another telltale sign that you can see. What can you see on the neck? Yeah, rubbing, bursitis. So anytime you see that, that's a problem that's been around for a long while. So again, if you're managing PMRs and TMRs, yeah, particle size is important, but they've got to be able to eat the thing as well. And if that's prolonged, that's going to be a problem, and that can be holding the cows back. Plus, as you might expect, it can just encourage more sorting on what's left behind, right? So that's not too helpful. Okay, how long have I got, Captain? I can do it in 10. I might be able to do it in less. So, this is a word from our sponsor, an unashamed commercial plug. Not everybody in the audience will be familiar with Levercell. And just so we're clear, As an independent consultant in New York, I use Levercell. I switched all my herds from Diamond V and put them on Levercell, and I had the edifying position of being able to measure dry matter intakes and milk component yield. So I knew exactly which way they were going, and I kept them on it. And I did that for 4 or 5 years before Lallemand put the golden handcuffs on me. So Levercell is unique in the world as an active dry yeast and can cut across many situations, and I make that claim, you know, in terms of fibre sources in any system, but I wanted to walk you through a few things. Some of those pathways that Ian and Greg talked about in terms of managing and massaging lactic acid, it will do that by stimulating bugs like Megasphaera and Pseudomonas in the rumen fluid and making sure that lactic acid gets processed into propacid. The propacid will then go across the bloodstream, as per Greg Penner said, and that goes to the liver where it can be made into something useful that will drive milk yield, right? You get the glucose there in the blood, then we can make lactose, that's in the gland, right? Anyway, you see where I'm going with that. So, it's not just a flash in the pan thing. We'll just spend 10 seconds here on heritage or pedigree. If you've got to jump some hurdles and get this qualified through Europe or the Canadian feed people like CFIA, you've got some hurdles to jump through. So this thing has a history, publications behind it, and data. So those of you using it, thank you very much. Those of you who are not, give it some consideration. This is a fibre part of this because most people are familiar with Levercell in terms of managing rumen pH. And the reason why pH is important is, Michael, I think built into these systems from my memory is there is some effect on pH. I certainly see it. And Michael showed you some rate values, some KD values. And you remember those pastures were right up there, I think on average. Well, certainly here, Michael, 8% per hour when you combine the fast and the slow, right? But anytime you start getting pHs going down based on Russell's work out of Cornell, you start to change that digestibility. So managing rumen pH is kind of important because it's kind of built into a lot of the dynamic models that are used, and I just want you to be aware of that, okay? And yeah, we've got a situation here where you can see, you know, you start to do comparisons. My palette will always be the same. Okay, the negative control diet will be in grey. The Levercell treated diet will be in green, and in every situation where we've done these studies, we've been able to elevate the rumen pH. So axiomatically, you might expect that if you do in situ studies, you are going to leverage an effect, okay, on NDF digestibility by using Levercell, and that would be true. What I want you to bear in mind, just be careful here, because I'm going to go to the slide. You don't necessarily have to be in acidotic situations for Levercell to work. There are some studies there where there are not, and there are some studies where they are, okay? I'm going to show you when the lady behind me has finished taking the photo there, give her time. Eyes in the back of his head. Sorry about that. There we go. This is Geddes' work. She did this both on corn silage and grass silage as well out of Portugal, and this is what she found. And so this is deliberately kept under non-sera or non-acidotic conditions to show the improvements in NDF digestibility as well. And in some lower NDF digestibility forages, we can get a real nice effect there. So Levercell, it's an active dry yeast for all seasons. That's not quite Shakespeare, David, but it's heading in the right direction. An active dry yeast for all seasons. Well, there you go. Anyway, so what's always compelling to me is not just in situ work, okay, that's better than in vitro in many cases, because it's at least in the cow's room and the rumen's moving, although it's in a Dacron bag. This is a nice piece of work here. This is looking at, true, it's a merocentric diet, okay, it's based on maize silage. And it does have some alfalfa in, I think. No, it doesn't, I apologise. Steam flake corn, citrus pulp, yeah, a little bit of hay there. But it's designed to make an effect to see what will happen. And what happens here, you can see, is you get an effect of the Levercell over and above the negative control. And again, I forget the number of cows, but it was a handy enough response. And if you looked at that difference, this is something I carry in the back of my mind. If you want the rule of thumb, if you're looking at trials, yeah, there could be some statistical significance. But for me, in North America, if I'm going to spot this, it's going to have to be about 4 units different in NDF digestibility for me to see it in the bulk tank on an all-year-round calving herd. You'll form your own metrics if you're seasonal calving, but I have to have a rule of thumb, okay? Now, if you do the math based on Ober-Allen from 1990, you kind of know what that response is to NDF digestibility. And that was actually since repeated in Wisconsin. The response wasn't quite as high, but that doesn't matter. It's the principle of the thing that's important. Increased NDF digestibility means you could leverage more milk component yield, okay? And so what you'd be expecting there based on the calculation is 2.6 pounds of extra milk. So it's in old money and not kilos, but I didn't want to corrupt the original data. We didn't actually get that, we actually got 2, okay? So It's not like Burger King. You don't get it all your own way. Some cows just partition energy in slightly different directions. But the point being, improved NDF digestibility in improved milk yield, okay? Does it work at grass? I haven't got time to read that, but in the rare occasions where you can get a trial set up on grazing systems, and this was done in Ireland in 2019, where you can keep the pasture allocation similar or same as best you can and compare two grazing herds. We've got one without the Levacelli and one with. Kind of look at some of the things here that Ian talked about before. You know, okay, some of them are subjective metrics, and it's just down to the eye of the beholder or the caller on the day, but you can see some improvements there on some of the cow metrics like rumination, body condition, rumen fill, obviously fecal texture. You know, some of the things may or may not be relevant, cleanliness would be, but more importantly on this one, you'll get a nice response here in milk yield. And so I have to be careful, because it's always easy for me just to cherry pick the stuff that would make my case for me. So I want to bounce back from that scenario and show you like a multiple study analysis, which is not all based on grazing herds. You know, some of them are partial TMR and some of them are TMR, but it was in fact published, and you can see the range of starch units there, okay, and proteins. So something for everybody. They're not all Americentric, North American type USA diets, and you'll see here an average increase of 2.6 pounds of milk per cow per day from the use of the Levacel. And really importantly, one thing you're going to find on Levacel compared to any other technology that you're going to use, it doesn't give a measurable increase in dry matter intake. Now that then means, because of that improvement in NDF digestibility, and there are other papers that show improvements in organic matter digestibility, you've got an improvement in feed conversion efficiency, which means you've also got an improvement in carbon efficiency. If you can generate more milk protein carbon and more milk fat carbon from the same level of dry matter intake, then you are by definition more efficient, both energetically and carbon based, okay? So we do have, this might not apply to you, we do have scenarios in the US where we'll get heat stress and we will actually double the Levacel inclusion up, and that stands us in good stead and gives us an even better response. I can't put it here because that's not the normal recommendation, but that would be 4 pounds of milk to protect against heat stress. You maybe don't get heat stress in New Zealand, but we certainly do. Even in New York we get it. We also get 130 inches of snow cumulative every year. So this is kind of what the producers are seeing in this scenario. You can see I've got it in kilograms now. I put the cow balance in for obvious reasons because it would be easy to fall off. I'm going to frame the Levacel situation to you in a couple of different ways. I'm nearly down the last slide, you'll be delighted to hear. It's like a type 1 or type 2 error. You know, if you don't do it, you never know what you're missing, and if you do it, you haven't got much to lose. That's a poor scientific phrasing of a type 1 and type 2 error, but you know the point I'm making that. In our gun culture in the States, we have a better phrase. You know, you never hit a target you don't take a shot at, right? So, I mean, it's just, it's something, it's a terrible thing, right? But it's something that's worth thinking about, right? So there's nothing to lose, and the ROI is always very good, right? So, for those of you who like to sit up late at night and do this sort of thing, and I definitely don't, for some reason they made me the gatekeeper of the Levacel programs, the subroutines. I'd be the worst. You might as well pick my grandson. He's got more nouns about IT than I have. But anyway, there are subroutines, both in NDS. Any NDS users here? Not anybody wants. You nearly did, sir. You nearly said something, no? No. And any AMTS users? Anyway, you start to get into these programs, you'll find that there's a subroutine there so you can examine Levacel. If you're like me and don't want to do that, just contact your Nutritech person. They'll be able to tell you about it, right? Okay, so I'm not going to read all this. You know where I'm coming from here in terms of just thinking about fibre in its broadest context. You know, just how fibre will build on what you're trying to do with pasture. And if you're going down with other managed fibre sources, particle length is right, presentation is right. And just one last slide so you think, not sure who this guy is and if we want him back again, but there's always more to everybody than meets the eye, okay? So, yeah, do I like to do a bit with cows? Okay, yeah, I do. Now, I have permission for this next line, double X chromosome lady, so don't judge me, okay? We've got my bride here, and we've got Bluey. Okay, one barks and one bites. You decide which one is which, okay? And then we have a very resigned-looking cattle dog. It was just having a nice snooze when the missus decided she wanted a photograph with the grandkids, and you can just look at, wow, when are they going to go away and leave me alone? So thank you for spending time with this afternoon. I enjoyed being with you. I hope there was a little nugget of something, and if not, I hope I made you smile and have a great day and look to maybe see you again in 2 years' time.
Just quickly, your room.
Okay, I've had word from my esteemed colleague, and she's totally right, we forgot this bit. Some of you have seen this before. I hope the staff aren't there, because this is where I make a bit of a mess. But I wanted to show you, the Penn State shaker box is fine, but there are no Penn State shaker boxes in the rumen. Everything settles out according to the law of thermodynamics in fluids, okay? And so if we kind of do that, what's going to happen there is we want all that rumen movement going on, okay, hopefully about every 45 seconds. So I'm just going to do a little something here. This is where it gets a little bit ugly, but I'm kind of going to shake things up a little bit, try not to get a shampoo of corn silage. I want you to see that in a matter of seconds, the fines have separated out from the fibres. And I think Greg and Ian were making the point about keeping that rumen wall moving. We want some of that effective fibre and physically effective fibre there going, just to make sure this stuff here that's really starchy in the maize silage doesn't stay on the bottom and burn a hole in the rumen wall, okay? So not all of it is in the rumen mat, and we want that in there, mixing those VFAs up and getting that starch off the rumen wall. So I hope that kind of makes the point for you. I'm just going to do one more with the other silage, okay? And then we'll just have made the point, and thank you for reminding me, Nadine. If I ever get organised, don't be dangerous. I'll not put such a big sample in, you'll kind of get a feel for it. And I think thank you to Stuart for getting these. So it just kind of makes the point that things will kind of segregate out. And there you go. That's typical of those sort of materials. So yeah, it is floating and it's giving you a bit of a raft of material there. So I'm just going to say this, then I really am going to stop honestly. You look at maize silage, okay, it's not really a true forage. It's like high moisture shell corn on a stick. It doesn't make it a bad thing. Does not make it a bad thing. Just be aware that it behaves in different ways to what you might think a grass silage or mixed alfalfa silage might do. And thank you for just giving me a few more minutes and reminding me on that one. Thank you.
Excellent. So we've just got my friend, thank you. Thank you, Tony. So my friend Nick here is going to set up our panel, and while he's doing that, are there any questions for Tony? Yep, James?
I'm just trying to, heat stress has become recognised in New Zealand,
Yeah.
and we're just trying to quantify.
Thank you for that.
And have you got any science around to quantify it?
So
Yes.
sorry, the question was around quantifying levy cell under heat stress conditions.
Yeah, well, and thanks for paraphrasing for the audience. This is a great question, and I didn't pay you to ask this question, did I? No. But I would actually love to be doing this in 2 years' time and have this conversation. We've done quite a bit of work, but let me start all the way back. People are familiar, I think, because I don't like to patronise the audience, so let's ask the question. People are familiar with using the term THI, temperature humidity index, right? Yeah. So I don't know where your numbers are. Our THI numbers are a bit of a compromise in the industry. If you think about, I am going to answer your question, but I want to start at the beginning. Remember, history is important. You think about where Bos Taurus comes from, kind of the Pleistocene era, the Ice Age. So they're like cold conditions, right? Okay, that's the first thing. And then when people look at temperature humidity indexes, we've kind of set a new standard around about 68, right? I don't know where you set your standard for New Zealand. So if you check the temperature and humidity, that's kind of where it's going to be. Where would your standard be in this part of the world for THI numbers? Not 72. You must be having the new numbers, right? More in the 60s. Oh, I am. Okay, yeah. We need the table. All right, I'm going old money, but I'm going old money. I want to take you down a path, okay? So when you look at Bob Colley's original work, there was a response, okay, way below where we are at the moment. Like, it was 56, 57 THI in old money, okay? You can have a look at that on the chart and see where, but thank you for saying. So where we are is kind of in the mid-60s, okay? And so cows get challenged a lot earlier than we think. Now, where I am with Levercell, we completed a study that was published in Journal of Dairy Science in 2020. It's Perdomo, I don't have it here, P-E-R-D-O-M-O, in 2020. And we looked at a diet with eight ounces of feed-grade sodium bicarbonate in, because that's just the way they work them, okay, with no Levercell. Then the same level of bicarbonate with the typical feeding rate of Leversol, which is 10 billion CFU per head per day, okay? And then we did the 2X just to see what would happen, all right? And we did this we got permission, okay, from the governing body at University of Florida to do this for 3 months. In other words, we were really going to challenge the cows. The THI on old money was ranging between 76 and 80, okay? So we were looking at milk yield, milk component yield, feed efficiency, and then some of those downstream effects that Greg was talking about, rumen lactate levels, rumen pH levels. So did we get a response from the 1X Leversol? Yes, we did, but we got a phenomenal response from the 2X level. By phenomenal, 4 pounds of milk. Okay, no dilution of milk components, a drop in some of those blood parameters post-downstream like haptoglobin, serum amyloid A, reductions in rumen lactate levels, okay, and so yeah, I mean, we are, in the States now, we routinely recommend, 2X Leversol for herds under heat stress, and just to round it off, sometimes our barns aren't as well managed as they should be for heat stress, and so with all the feces and urines and cow bodies in there, you remember what I said about overstocking, it can be a lot warmer out there than what we think the ambient is out. Does that make sense? The barn can be a lot more stuffy. Yeah, thank you for asking that. It's a good technology for heat stress. We use it tactically, we don't use it all year round.
All right, what I might do is get all of our speakers up on the stage and we'll get our panel started so that we can finish on time for everybody. I'm mindful it is a Friday.
I'm going to